All right. Remember where we were last week? We were discussing the timeline, right? About when all of this stuff was going to happen. Today, I want to continue that because I want you to see when you begin to put the timeline together of Revelation, you begin to realize that it's not as hard to understand. It's complicated, but it's not as hard to understand as a lot of times we think it is. Does that make sense? So this morning what I want to do is I want to draw anybody beginning to recognize that little line yet? All right, so this is the first seal. Okay, right?
Yep.
Why do I have to bring that end of the line in? Because the seventh seal. Oh, I love it. Out here is the seventh seal. How long is 3.5 years? Is 3.5 years long in your mind?
Depends on the situation.
It depends on what you're going through. That's the absolute truth of it. If Jason's gone for a year, it's pretty long.
That's a long time.
But aren't you glad it's not 3 years?
Very.
You see? So 3 years can become enormously long if you're talking about something like that. But in the scale of, okay, I've lived 62 years. 3 years of that, not all that long. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Looking back on it, I'm like, gee whiz, where'd the last 10 years go? You know, and so it's all relative. So anyway, so we've got the first seal, the sixth seal. What's the sixth seal all about?
Second coming.
Okay. Jesus' second coming. Okay. So what's the seventh seal? Amy?
Silence in heaven.
Silence in heaven. Do you remember why there's silence in heaven?
There's nobody there.
Because there's nobody there. Exactly. Okay. So now we've got the sixth seal, we've got the first seal. Where does the second, third, and fourth seal come in? What do those three seals cover? War. Famine. Death and hell. Okay? When you've got war, you've got death. When you've got death among people who don't know Christ, you've got hell. Whenever you've got massive war, you've got famines, you've got want, you've got a lot of suffering. Yes?
Yep.
Okay. So, what happens during this first 3.5 years? Sorry? Okay, the Antichrist, the first seal, when it's opened, the Antichrist is revealed. He comes out and does what? Makes a covenant with many for a period of time. All right? So then, when he makes his covenant, what happens at the 3.5 year mark? He breaks the covenant. What's it called? Abomination.
That causes desolation. Yeah.
Of desolation. Okay, good. So we're pretty much together here already. So war, famine, and death and hell, are they going to happen up here in the first 3.5?
No.
Why not?
Because it's relatively peaceful time. Because this is his deceiving period.
That's the buttering up period.
The buttering up period. There we go. All right. So we got a peaceful time. So the second, third, and fourth seal don't exactly describe this first 3.5 year period. That's the reason he's often called the man of peace. So a lot of stuff starts right here at this midpoint. What kind of stuff do we talk about happening during that second 3.5 year period?
The seas turning to blood.
No.
Okay.
What's happening during this when this starts? What happens?
Christians start getting killed.
Huh?
Christians start being killed.
Okay. What else? Did you bring your notes?
They start preparing for war.
The outline that I gave you.
Holy city will be trampled. The mark of the beast.
Okay, we got the mark. What else?
Israel flees
The
into the
Antichrist
desert.
is revealed.
No, that's out here. This is when he's revealed. What happens at the 3.5 year period?
Oh, he sets himself up as God.
He sets himself up in the temple as God. Okay? And opposes everything about God. He causes the sacrifice to cease.
Right.
Okay? So okay, what happens then when this happens, what happens to Israel?
They flee to the mountains.
Israel flees.
So that means persecution's going on.
The what?
They're feeling persecution at that point.
I didn't hear
They're
you.
feeling persecution for them to want to flee.
Where does it say that? Why would there be any persecution on Israel?
Well, they've already, if the Antichrist has taken over the temple, then evidently he's persecuting the Jews and the Christians and whoever.
Okay? Did you follow that?
Yes.
So you've got the Antichrist that's beginning to turn away. He's breaking this covenant with Israel, and he takes over the temple and begins to do all kinds of unkind things, to put it kind of in a silly way. All right. So Israel does what? Israel flees into the what?
Mountains.
Into the mountains, into the desert. Over there, that's all the same. Okay? So Israel flees, and as a result of her fleeing, with divine protection, what happens to the Antichrist?
He gets really mad and attacks her children that are left.
Well, not her children that are left. There's got to be real specific on that one. What people does he turn on after Israel flees into the mountains and God lets them get away? Christians, okay? So he turns on Christians, on believers, okay? Because it says very specifically he turns on those who have the testimony of Jesus. Okay, so you got to realize that it talks about Jesus specifically. So we got all this stuff happening at this juncture, this 3.5 year point. And so Christians now are going to be what?
Killed. Persecuted.
I was waiting for somebody to say the word persecuted, but she jumped up to the actual word I was heading for first. Christians are going to be killed, martyred. So all of this stuff happens or begins to happen at this 3.5 year point. So last week we talked about, we've already said that the sixth seal talks about Jesus coming. Right? So does any of the other things talk about Jesus coming?
God's wrath is poured out on
No. Actually talking about Jesus coming. What's the seventh trumpet talking about?
The second
The seventh trumpet also talks about Jesus' second coming.
The bowl poured out.
Okay, now we're together. And the seventh bowl also talks about Jesus' second coming. Okay? That's how the timeline works. This is the end of the timeline. The sixth seal talks about Jesus' second coming. The seventh trumpet talks about Jesus' second coming. And the seventh bowl also talks about Jesus' second coming. So we've got the sixth trumpet last week, remember? What did it do? Do you remember?
That's when the 4 angels were released.
Okay.
River Euphrates.
Do you remember? The sixth bowl? How many of you were here last week?
Bowl or trumpet?
Bowl or trumpet?
Huh?
Bowl or trumpet?
The sixth trumpet.
Okay.
Okay. What was the sixth trumpet about?
It was to kill, what is it, third part of the men?
I'm sorry?
The third part of the men? Of men?
200 million.
No. Are you at the sixth trumpet?
I think so. No, the sixth trumpet was when the 4
Saying the
angels
sixth-
that were bound were
Saying to the
released.
sixth angel, which had the trumpet, loose the 4 angels which are beyond the great river Euphrates. The 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year, which is slay a third part of men.
Okay. So the sixth trumpet gives us the angels are released that are bound to the river Euphrates, and their job when they're released, as a result of their being released. Now I'm saying this very carefully, okay? As a result of their being released, 200 million horsemen are going out. That's a lot of cavalry, let me tell you.
Yes.
And so there's going to be, obviously, a war, right?
Yeah.
That war is talked about here in the sixth trumpet. And as a result of a third of mankind is going to die. And the sixth bowl. It's all the same thing. Do you understand what I'm trying to do for you here? These are not different events. Those are the same event described in different terms. Okay? So you've got, basically, the result of this is Armageddon. Okay? And this war is going to actually end with Jesus' second coming. But that's in chapter, I think, 19? Yeah, chapter 19. We're not quite there yet. It gets exciting even more from here, but I want you to connect these dots. I want you to see this timeline. To me, seeing the timeline, the more I think about this timeline, and the more I try to put the pieces in this timeline in the right order, the more I begin to see the overall what's happening, and it raises a lot of questions, okay? So it's almost 10 o'clock. What I want to do, what I'm hoping I'll have time to do in here, is raise some of the questions that this brings to my mind that I want to just kick around in here. All right. Let's see. So now we've got the 6th trumpet and the 6th bowl. You see the 7th bowl and the 7th trumpet. This is the timeline, okay? So now we move backwards a little bit, and we've got the 5th bowl, right? And we've got the 5th seal. Let me turn that around. We've got the 5th seal. We're going to talk about the 5th bowl and the 5th trumpet. All right, so we've got up here at the top, we've got the 5th seal. Where does the 5th seal fit in the timeline? Y'all know what's going on with the 5th seal? It's a picture of the martyrs in heaven. And where do those martyrs all come from? I don't mean location. I mean they come out of a... No. Because they've been killed. Martyrs are ones who've been killed. This 3.5-year period. Ever since he turns on Christians and kills them and martyrs them. So we've got people dying, Christians dying during this period. This 42-month period. So when the fifth seal is opened in chapter 6, it says, I saw unto the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and the testimony of they had maintained. This is chapter 6 and verse 9. And then verse 10 says, they called out in a loud voice, how long, Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood? Then each of them was given white robe, and they were told to wait a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and brothers who were to be killed as they had been was completed. All right? So those were already martyrs that had been killed for their faith in Jesus Christ. Their souls are already in heaven. They're going, how long? And they're told, wait a little longer because there are still more that are going to be martyred and going to be coming up here. So this 5th seal is somewhere during this 3.5-year period. Okay? Exactly where it falls in here, I don't know. It doesn't tell us. It's got to come after this because it's already people that have been killed for their faith. So it's got to come after this 3.5-year period, but there's still more to go. So it's somewhere in this 3.5-year period. You know, exactly where? I don't know.
So these martyrs are not just, I mean, people have been martyred throughout the ages for their testimony. So.
Right. I think Revelation deals with this 7-year period.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't think it's a matter of everybody who's ever been martyred. Okay? Otherwise, it doesn't fit, the very detailed picture that's given of this particular time period. Make sense? If somebody were to argue and say, well, I think it means martyrs from forever, I'm not going to debate that, because that's if you want to view it as martyrs that have ever been killed for Christ, that's okay too. I don't think it would change what's said, and I don't think it would change where this falls. Follow me? So if you want to add those who had ever been killed for Christ since Jesus was on earth, that's okay.
Because I agree with you on that, because it's the cry of the martyrs. They're making this statement, Lord, how long? It's not just saying the martyrs from this, I'm not phrasing it right. I agree with you when you say it fits in that timeline, because it's not specifically saying that they did anything different to get there. They were just killed for their testimony. But when they're speaking at this time in the vision that he had, they're crying, okay, Lord, your bowls are being poured out, blah, blah, blah. When are you going to avenge us? And he's saying, wait, it's not done yet for the martyrs. So it could be argued either way. But I think in this context, it's talking about the people that were martyred from the abomination to the end.
Okay. All right. So now, that's the fifth seal. We've already talked about the second, third, and fourth seal, right? And they fall from here probably from the point of the abomination of desolation, because this is when real intense martyrdom, killing, is starting to happen. Up here, he's a peaceful guy. Here he changes and opposes everything about God and begins to kill Christians. You see where the transition takes place? Okay? So the second seal, so we're talking about all of this killing each other, war, and famine, and anyway, all that stuff. The second through the fourth seals are opened probably in this area, and I'm guessing they probably weren't opened like the second seal and then a long time later, the third seal and a long time later, the fourth seal. I think they probably all were opened fairly quickly in succession, because when you've got war, you've got famine and you've got death and hell. So I think the second, third, and fourth seal were probably opened pretty quickly in succession. So the second, third, and fourth, the fifth, and the sixth seal brings Jesus back. So I think the seals are the overall skeleton of the book of Revelation. Okay? All right, so let's go. Now we're down back to the trumpets and bowls. We've talked about the sixth trumpet, the sixth bowl being Armageddon and that battle. What about the fifth trumpet? Where does it fall on here? Obviously, it's got to fall before the sixth. Okay? So where do we put the fifth trumpet, and why? Take a look at chapter 9, beginning at verse 1. It says, "The fifth angel sounded his trumpet, and I saw a star that had fallen from the sky to the earth. The star was given the key to the shaft of the abyss. When he opened the abyss, smoke rose from it like the smoke of a gigantic furnace. The sun and sky were darkened by the smoke from the abyss, and out of the smoke locusts came up and had power like that of scorpions on the earth. They were told not to harm the grass of the earth or any plant or tree, but only those people who did not have the seal of God on their foreheads." Okay? "They were not given power to kill them, but only to torture them for 5 months. And the agony they suffered was like that of the sting of a scorpion when it strikes a man. During those days men will seek death, but will not find it. They will long to die, but death will elude them." And then it talks about what those locusts looked like. Wow. To torment people on the earth for 5 months, to the point where they will wish when they've been stung that they could die, but they can't. That's a lot of suffering. But you notice who gets this torment. Specifically stated, who gets this torment?
Without the seal of God.
Those without the seal of God. Okay, so without the seal, that means that when the fifth trumpet sounds, there has already been a sealing of those who believe in Jesus Christ. Okay, so now the fifth trumpet has no equivalent in bowls. So let's take a look. The first trumpet. What's the first trumpet?
Hail, fire, blood.
Hail, fire, mixed with blood. Okay? What happens?
Third of the earth.
A third of the earth.
Third of the trees, third of the grass.
But what specifically? We're talking about trees. What else?
All the green grass.
Grass.
Trees, grass.
And what else?
It says earth, trees, and grass.
There you go. Earth, trees, and grass. All right. That's the first trumpet. And what happens with the first bowl?
Painful sores.
Okay, so the first bowl is sores. Painful sores. Now, who is doing all of this? Pouring out all this? God.
God.
Okay? So we've got when the bowl gets poured out, where do these painful sores come from? We talked about that when we covered these. Look up here. When hail and fire, mixed with fire and blood, comes out of the sky, if you're outside, are you going to get hit by some of this hail? Is that going to create sores?
Yes.
Yes. I'm saying probably. Probably. And I think that's why these two are connected. The first trumpet and the first bowl. So now let's take a look at the second trumpet. What happens with the second trumpet?
Blazing mountain into the sea.
The sea,
Third
what happens to it? Turns to blood.
Third of
Creatures in the sea now.
Sea creatures
and then a third of the ships were destroyed.
die. And ships. Okay? And then you've got the second bowl. What happens in the second bowl?
Seas turn to blood.
The sea to blood,
It says everything in the sea world.
and sea creatures die.
Creatures die.
Okay, so you see the similarity between these two? Okay? That's why I say that the second trumpet and the second bowl are exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
All right, and then you've got, and I got a very little room left here. You've got the third. Got the third trumpet. What? What do you get with the third trumpet?
Stars from the sky.
Stars
Torch.
fall.
It says a great star fell from heaven.
Okay. So what does it do?
Fell on the
Burning as
third
it
of the
were a
rivers.
lamp.
The rivers. You see the difference here? The third trumpet falls judgment on the rivers, that's fresh water. And the
Spring water.
second trumpet before it was on the sea, salt water. Okay? So the rivers and the springs turn to
Become poisonous.
Bitter water.
yeah. When you look at the third bowl,
Since the waters turn to blood.
okay, I missed that here. Clean that up a little bit. The rivers become poison. Okay, so the third bowl gets poured out, and the springs
Blood.
Turn to blood.
Rivers and springs turn to blood.
Okay? Again, I think the third trumpet and the third bowl are talking about exactly the same thing. God's judgment on the fresh water. Then you've got the fourth trumpet. What do you get with the fourth trumpet?
The third part of the sun was smitten.
Moon and stars.
The fourth trumpet does one thing.
It takes a third of the
Stars
light. Because it takes a third of the sun, a third of the moon, a third of the stars,
Okay?
so that they were darkened, and a third of the day did not shine, likewise the night.
Isn't that when the abyss is open and all the smoke comes up and pours everything?
No,
out?
that's the locust.
Yeah, this
Oh,
is the fifth
okay.
one.
Okay, so the fourth trumpet. How do I get enough room to write it here? All right. Okay. Darkness. Let me just write dark. Okay? The fourth trumpet brings darkness to a third. All right? And then what does that equate to in the bowls?
The
When does the darkness happen in the bowls?
The fifth
The
bowl.
fifth.
The fifth bowl.
Yeah.
You see what we had here? We got a sixth bowl. We've got the fourth trumpet and the fifth bowl. Darkness. You see? So now we got the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh trumpets. Right? We've got the third and the fifth bowl, the sixth bowl, and the seventh bowl. What's the fourth bowl do?
Scorches people with fire.
Scorches people with fire. Remember, we're talking about painful sores? Okay? So you've got the fourth bowl. Doesn't have any equal in the trumpets or in the seals. Okay? So it stands by itself, but I can't stick it in between here. So the fourth bowl is the sun scorches. The people in the Antichrist's kingdom. It doesn't affect the rest of the world. It's only on his kingdom. And what does it say they do? They curse the name of God, they refuse to repent, and they refuse to glorify God. Talk about hard-hearted people. People just don't get the message. Sin has that hard of a grip on people's lives. So if you wonder why your sons or daughters or grandkids or aunts and uncles or parents or whatever, just don't, no matter what you tell them, no matter what you do, they refuse to accept Christ and turn to Him. It's because sin has that hard a grip on people.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. All right. So we've got all of those. We've got all those laid out now. Any questions about the timeline?
So where would you kind of put the fourth bowl? Kind of, it's still in order between the third and the fifth, before the fourth,
Yes.
and third trumpet. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just making sure.
I think the fourth bowl is still in between the third bowl and before the fifth bowl. So it's still right in here.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Okay?
Thank you.
But there's no other activities happening. In other words, there's not like a trumpet that's being done at the same time that the bowl is. It's probably the same trumpet. The third trumpet probably is going on while the sun is scorching. You follow? All right. It's not one after the other. One does this and then it stops and then this happens. This stops and then this happens. So, do you see these trumpets and bowls right in here are all God's wrath being poured out on the kingdom of the Antichrist? There's a sealing of the saints that happens in chapter 7 of Revelation that we talked about before. That sealing has to happen before all of this stuff begins. So there's somewhere in here, there is a sealing of the saints. Okay, before these things start. Because it specifically says that the saints of God are being sealed on their forehead before the trees and the grass and the earth are harmed. That's specifically what it says in Revelation 7. And so because of that, the sealing has to happen out here. Okay? Now, I have a question for you. When the mountain gets thrown into the sea, it says that a mountain is cast into the sea, and the sea turns to blood, or a third of the sea turns to blood.
Yeah.
Yvonne and I talked about this morning. What's your picture of what happens? I'm going to go that way first. Huh? Well, no. The mountain cast into the sea, it turns to blood. How much? Where? Who does it affect?
Well, it's going to be one of the large oceans. There's a third Pacific Ocean, maybe. It's going to have to be one of the large oceans. It's going to have to be like some kind of a big meteor or something that falls from the sky.
Okay.
What do you think?
Okay. Any other ideas?
It could be like a volcano eruption blowing everything out and the whole mountain.
See, I'm not talking about the details of what happens. I'm talking about the result. The result affects a third of the sea.
It's a third of the
It
water.
doesn't say. It doesn't say seas. How many seas do we have on this planet?
7.
How many?
7 seas.
7 seas. It says the mountain fall is cast into the sea. What sea? We're talking about the Antichrist's kingdom. Okay? Where's the seat of his power? We've already discussed that.
Jerusalem.
Is it Jerusalem?
But the third temple.
He sets himself up in the temple as God to desecrate the temple. But where actually is the seat of his power?
The saints.
There's another city that's mentioned. We've already talked about it, but only briefly. Okay? One of the chapters we've been through talked about the great city, Babylon. Okay? I believe Babylon is the great city, is the seat of his power. The place. Where's Babylon? Iraq. Babylon is in Iraq. Where's all the turmoil going on right now in the world? Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan.
Right.
I mean, we're talking about the globe is already enmeshed because of that particular area of the world. So now, because of that, having set that picture in your mind, what sea
The Red Sea.
would be there that they would all be familiar with?
Persian Sea.
Huh?
Not the Persian Gulf, but the
Mediterranean?
Adriatic.
That you could, any of the guesses is possible. But my guess is the Great Sea would be the sea that they would all be familiar with. That's the Mediterranean. Okay? It could be the Sea of Galilee, which is a little tiny sea. You know, it could be the Red Sea, but, you know, so any of those, it doesn't tell you what sea it is. All right? It could have, but it doesn't. But any of those seas in that area could be what it's talking about. Louise?
I was going to say, Ezekiel says that the Great Sea is the Mediterranean.
Ezekiel says the Great Sea is the Mediterranean. Do you know the verse?
Yeah, 47 and 10.
Okay, read it. Interesting, huh?
And it shall come to pass that the fisher shall stand upon it from En-Gedi even unto whatever that word is, there shall be a place to spread forth nets, their fish shall be according to their kinds as the fish of the great sea, exceeding many. This
Okay.
is the Great Sea. and
Okay,
it
it's
says-
talking about the Great Sea. The Great Sea is normally referred to as the Mediterranean. So we could very well be talking about the Mediterranean Sea, being where the mountain gets cast, the meteor, whatever it is, gets cast into that sea, and a third of it turns to blood. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Do you follow? So it's a sea. It's not all of the seas.
Right.
That's one of the questions I had. What sea is it talking about?
Well, if it says it's the Great Sea, I mean, look at the map.
Well, it doesn't.
Is
In Revelation, when the trumpet and the bowl gets poured out and that mountain gets cast into the sea, it just says the sea. Okay? It doesn't say the Great Sea. It just says the sea, which is why I can't just absolutely say that it's the Mediterranean. It could be the Sea of Galilee. It could be the Red Sea. Okay, so it could be any of those seas, but it's only one of them. It's not the entire planet.
Yeah.
That's the reason why only a third of the sea gets affected. Okay, so it's not even the entire sea, it's only a part of it. So this meteor falls on let's say on the eastern end of the sea, and it turns that part to blood. Follow? All right. So now,
How would that not affect the whole sea? If you had blood, I mean, that would contaminate the whole.
I would imagine it would. I would imagine eventually it would, but when you've got something that causes a real catastrophe at one part, it's going to affect the people in that area, and then it may dissipate to where it doesn't affect a whole lot of people further on down. Like an oil spill.
Yeah.
They clean it up.
Okay?
Yeah.
So this, what I want to do is get you to begin to think in terms of that Revelation is not necessarily global. It is global to some extent, but not global in all of its effect. Follow me? Now, I have another question. And I got about 2 minutes. How much time is there for all of these trumpets and bowls, this judgment to be poured out? Does it have to be 3.5 years? Does God's judgment in all of this, burning up the sea and burning up the grass and trees and burning up turning the sea to blood and poisoning the fresh water and all of this stuff, does it have to happen over a long 3.5 year period of time?
No.
What if God at one point decides that He's going to do this and it all happens in quick succession? What if it happens over a period of 5 months before His return? So in other words, basically the first 3 years, all of the killing, the martyrdom, the nasties that the Antichrist is doing, okay, is happening. Christians are being martyred and all that. And then finally God says enough. And He pours out all of this stuff on the kingdom of the Antichrist in the Middle East. And then it turns into Armageddon. And the kingdoms of the world, remember we talked last week about the kings of the world and the kings of the east being drawn down into Armageddon for a battle. You follow? Who's fighting who? Why, if everybody is aligned with the Antichrist that are not Christians, why is there a war at all? What's the point of a war? Why is there any need for a war? Who would fight who? If the kings of the east come down there and the kings of the rest of the world are coming down there, and there's this huge, what sounds like a world war taking place right there in that area. Why? See, I'm not convinced that everybody is going to follow the Antichrist through this whole 3.5 year period. That's the reason for the war at the end. And Jesus Christ's return is going to be part of that battle at the very end. That's the timeline. But I wanted you to see the timeline, because it's important. As you begin to see this, all of a sudden now, it's not necessarily global, and it's not necessarily the Antichrist rules the world and everybody just follows. So that tells me the United States might actually still be in the play. That's why it's possible that the eagle, Israel gets the wings of a great eagle to assist her in her flight into the desert. It could very well be the United States is the one that stands by her and assists her in that flight. That's speculation, but I want you to think about it. Next week, Father, in the name of Jesus, as we go into worship, help us to lift your name up. Help us to worship you with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. Help us to understand your word. You said that if we read and understand this book, this prophecy, that we'll be blessed. Bless us, Lord, as we go from here. In the name of Jesus, amen.